something recently happened that there's an individual in town, and it's really, really cool. And I'm hoping to get her on the show to talk about grit and how to build a brand and stuff like this. And it's someone that's run a bunch and won a bunch of races that you've been at, Tim, is Sika Henry.
Oh, yeah.
And so she became the first professional Black triathlete in the world. And it's super cool. She's been on this, she was on Sports Center, I think I saw her, or some sort of ESPN, and a plethora of, the word of the day, plethora. She's been on a plethora of different media outlets talking about it. And the grit that she's had to go through to see this is really interesting. And so she's been able to put the region on a map a little bit. And so I'm hoping to get her on as a guest in the future as well, just so we can talk about, how to build a brand, right? Because that's something that you do as an individual in this in that sport. But then to have the resiliency and the grit that she had a big accident. She fell out, she crashed a bike or something like that, like 26 miles an hour, like a few years ago. And to come back from that is something, that's a face plant that a lot of businesses go through, how to get through stuff like that. I think that could be very, very valuable from an athletic standpoint to parallel that to a business. That would be interesting. Is there anything from a disaster standpoint that you can think of with you in business over the last decade or so that you've gone through that, like, you got through because you looked at like an athlete and how they got through something like that?
Thankfully, no, not disastrous. But I had this conversation yesterday that I know that there was a lot of times that I was very thankful that, and then even going back to with Gavin, and not necessarily encouraging mistakes, but when you're small, the whole idea is learn those mistakes, experience those mistakes now, because it's a lot easier to handle and deal with $100 mistake or $1,000 mistake as opposed to hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars because you didn't learn it early enough.
What about the aspect of taking forever to qualify for Boston?
That's his grit. It is,
because I know that was hard for you.
Stubbornness.
You think stubbornness? Why? Because I know you put in the hours.
In a good way, stubborn in the sense of I'm not giving up, and but it's one of those deals where you never know where the finish line is, and you just got to keep. You don't know where the finish line is from a business standpoint. You might be one call away, one contract away, one purchase order away. You just don't know. And if you just throw in the towel because you're tired, you just go on never knowing. And and as you found out, Zach, with your Ironman, it's like you put in weeks and months of training. And this goes back to the mastering your performance aspect. You have to do everything. You have to make sure that you're trying the right foods before you do this, the right drinks before you do this, the right clothes, make sure your toenails are clipped. You got to do all this stuff to make sure that when you perform on game day or race day or whatever it is, that you're at your best. And that you
practice. You said something before, like you practice. There's a line you said you practice how you run or something. There's a line that you've used before, like you. It's on that mindset, but it was like a catchier phrase.
Because I don't think that I shared this on the show before, but for me to qualify for Boston, I had to run faster than 3 hours and 20 minutes.
That's the qualifying time.
Just to qualify. And then what happens is, so this year they limit it to 25,000 runners, and then they take the fastest group of runners in each age category and gender category. So just because you did a sub 320 doesn't guarantee that you are in the race. You still have to be one of the fastest qualifying times.
So it's a qualifying time and then a top percentile of whoever else that's in that percentile. And it took you had the first time you ever got the qualifying time was one city, March 1, 2020. And that was your sixth time?
Yeah, that was my fifth time running the one city. So as it turns out.
And that's seven. So hold on. So that's 5 or 6, because I think you took 1 year off. So that's 6 years of training, 6 times 365. That's 2,000 days of doing basically the same thing over and over again until you actually figured out the game day aspect of it. That's interesting. So it turns out.
So it turns out that particular race I ran a 3-hour, 12-minute and 12-second race. So I had 7, almost 8 minutes of cushion below the qualifying time. And then as it turns out, you submitted your application to run Boston. You waited 5 days because they have to look at everybody's score, determine what the fastest scores were to see who actually gets in the race. So long story short, the cutoff line to get into Boston for my particular age group was 3 hours, 12 minutes, and 13 seconds. So I made Boston by 1 second. And that just, when you translate that into business, you just have to keep on persevering. You have to run through the finish line. If I would have taken one extra sip of water, if I would have given one extra high five, if my shoe would have came untied, whatever the case was, I wouldn't have qualified. And so from a business standpoint, you've got to see your way through every single day. I mean, there's a lot of times that you have the choice. Do I do the easy thing at work or towards my business, or do I do the hard thing that I know that needs to get done in order to move my business forward? So many people are going to take the easy road, and then a week, 2 weeks, 2 months goes by, and your business is still in the same place. Whereas if you go ahead and you take you choose the tough pill, the hard task to do, that's what's going to move your business forward. So, I mean, this is just a long story in the sense of, man, you think you've got it made, and it turns out I made it by 1 second.
Do you think that you tried harder on this one?
Well, I thought I tried as hard as I could on all of them.
Yeah.
Granted,
when you finished, did you know, like, okay, this one I actually put in different effort, or no?
No, I mean, there was a couple of years ago, and there's some other outliers that you can't account for either. So
Weather.
like two years ago, it was really, really hot. It was unseasonably hot. When we ran it in 2020, it was freezing. I mean, we were shivering before the start line, and I was carrying
timbers, Gavin.
Yeah,
I had cold weather. This one,
and I was holding on to hand warmers and just to try to keep myself warm. But all that stuff everything has to all work together in order to get the outcome that you're going to have. But I thought that I put everything. But there were times once I knew that in years past that I wasn't going to make the cut. Then, yeah, I would take my time through a water station and hydrate because my legs were on fire and cramped.
Last question about that specifically. Do you think that is that the proverbial throwing in the towel in that case? And like, is there a way that like you can get over that a different way instead of throwing in the towel and maybe pushing through that in a different kind of way?
I don't know. I mean, you know just as well as I do.
Well, I didn't do a very good job of it 2 weeks ago is what I'm getting at.
You get frustrated, and it's just like, man, it wasn't my year. And then you just immediately think about, all right, I'm going to let my body recover for a couple of weeks, and it's time to jump back on that horse and get after it again.
Well, it's easier when we're like not in the moment. And I try and tell people all the time, like even when I did the Swamp Man half marathon with you, 13.1, and that was only a 2-hour race, right? This is a roughly a 5-hour race that I was doing. And yours is 3 and some change. Like, you're not in your right mind a lot of times, right? Because I'm already taxed into this thing 4 hours, and I'm trying to think, and I can't. And then it took one little bad decision, and then boom. And I remember even talking to you about some of this stuff during marathon training, where it was like, hey, like to get to this point, you have to be 3 hours into this race or into this practice. And that sucks that like, you can't practice that like 15 minutes and stuff like that.
Right.
And so like, your mind isn't, from a business perspective, when you're going through something, and it's like, that's why I always say, get advice from people who have gone through that thing so that they can put you in the right mindset. Because when you're there, it can be very, I don't know, delusional. It can be very discouraging. It can be very difficult to try to figure out, okay, what in the worldwide web am I saying to myself?
Right.
Because to me, like I ultimately what happened to me is like, yes, some things happen, but I feel like I gave up on the race. And like, that's discouraging to me that I put in all this work. And like, I tried doing all these other things, right? And it didn't work. And then at one point, somehow I did one thing, and that just led into me walking a lot more than I wanted to. And that was me giving up on that race. And I basically, had I thought about that through, kind of like being prepared, like you were talking about with performances early on, it's like, okay, well, maybe had I talked to myself about, hey, when this happens, do this, it would have been better. But I didn't, because I really hadn't been in that situation over a year. And I felt going into it, I felt like that was a good avenue. And so it's interesting how, like, you don't want to like predict these things to happen, but it's almost like it's important to some extent when it does happen. Hey, do this thing in your playbook.
Right. Yeah. For me, if I walk through the first time I walk through a water station, I'm done.
Yeah.
It's all she wrote.
Yeah.
So I can't, and I won't. Same holds true for business. You just got to keep on pushing.
Even when it's hard.
I've been directly involved within our entrepreneurial community for years. And the most common question I get is, Tim, I want to get involved, but I don't know what events I should attend. Well, Startwheel eliminates that pain point because we consolidate all the events you should attend into a single calendar. Now you'll be in the know and see where to spend your time. Gone is the need to search multiple websites and calendars. Just head to startwheel.org and see for yourself. That's startwheel.org.